He thought I was just an ornament, used to ordering me to just smile and stay quiet while the important men talked. He forgot who I was. He forgot that before I was his wife, I was a forensic accountant. He wanted me to be silent. He didn't realize that my one sentence would cost his partner $480,000. My name is Alara Hayes. The air in our penthouse was thick enough to chew. It was a Tuesday night in Chicago, the kind of wet, oppressive heat in early September that clings to your skin and promises a storm that never quite breaks. The city lights glittered 34 stories below, but up here, the silence was manufactured, broken only by the distant hum of the air conditioning fighting a losing battle. I was fastening a diamond earring, a 5th anniversary gift, when Julian walked into the bedroom. He was 38, and in the 6 years we had been married, he had perfected the art of entering a room as if he owned the air within it. He didn't look at me. His gaze, sharp and assessing, was fixed on the open doors of my walk-in closet. He was already in his suit, a custom charcoal gray that probably cost more than my first car. His focus was total. "Not that one," he said. His voice clipped. He gestured dismissively at the black dress I had laid out on the bed. He walked past me, his scent, expensive cologne, and ambition trailing him like a shadow. He sifted through the hangers with an impatient flick of his wrist, the metallic scrape setting my teeth on edge. He pulled out a sheath of navy blue silk. "Wear this." He tossed it onto the bed. It landed with a soft, expensive sigh. "It looks expensive," he continued, finally turning to face me, his eyes running over me, not as a husband looks at a wife, but as a handler inspects a prize animal. "But it's not distracting. It says class, not flash. Tonight, we need class." I looked at the dress. It was beautiful, of course. Everything Julian allowed in our life was beautiful and cold and carefully chosen for its precise impact. He loosened his tie, though it was already perfect. It was a nervous tick he thought no one noticed. "Ilara, listen to me." I turned back to the mirror, pretending to fuss with the earring. "I'm listening. Julian, tonight is big. This isn't some quarterly review dinner. This is Marcus and our new investor, Petrov." He said the name with a mixture of reverence and anxiety. "This is a multi-million-dollar deal. Alara, the one we've been working toward for a year. This deal sets us up. It sets me up." He stepped behind me. I could see his reflection in the mirror, towering over my seated form. He placed his hands on my bare shoulders. His grip was just a fraction too tight, his fingers pressing into the muscle. It wasn't a caress. It was a warning, a physical reminder of his control. His voice dropped, becoming a soft, persuasive purr that slid under my skin and made me want to recoil. "Here is what you are going to do. You are going to sit at that table, and you are going to smile. You will look beautiful in that dress. You will nod when Petrov talks, and you will laugh softly if Marcus makes one of his terrible jokes. And that is all." He squeezed my shoulders. "Your job tonight is to be lovely and supportive and to let the adults talk. Do you understand me? No interruptions, no clever questions, and God help me, Alara, do not offer your opinions." He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the command sink in. "Just stay quiet." There it was, the familiar, bitter prickle of resentment that had become my constant companion. It tasted like old pennies in the back of my throat. Before I was Alara Hayes, trophy wife. I was Alara Jensen, summa cum laude. I was the one who could find a ghost in a balance sheet, the one who saw the patterns no one else did. I was a senior forensic accountant at one of the biggest firms in the country. I led teams. I testified in federal court. Men twice my age had listened, rapt, when I spoke. Until Julian had convinced me, with his silken promises and strategic complaints, that my career was a distraction from his. He needed a partner. He'd said he needed someone to support his ascent. What he meant was he needed an audience, a prop. He had slowly, methodically, persuaded me to give up my entire identity, and I had, blinded by what I thought was love and partnership. Now, my sharpest skill was approving menus for charity luncheons. He must have seen something flicker in my eyes, a ghost of the woman I used to be. He let go of my shoulders and smirked, a cruel, familiar twist of his lips. And Alara, you know, don't make that auditor face. The one where you look like you're mentally recalculating the restaurant's depreciation schedule? It scares people like Petrov. It's severe. That was the true insult. He wasn't just silencing me. He was mocking the very intelligence he had once claimed to admire, the mind he had once used to save his own skin in his first failed startup. I looked at the woman in the mirror. Her face was smooth, 34 years old, framed by hair that cost a fortune to keep looking so effortlessly natural. Her eyes were blank. I didn't recognize her. She was a beautifully crafted shell, and the real me was trapped somewhere deep inside, suffocating. I forced the muscles of my face to relax into a placid, agreeable mask. I met his gaze in the reflection. "I understand, Julian," I said, my voice perfectly even, perfectly empty. "I won't say a word." His entire posture relaxed. The tension visibly bled from his shoulders. He had delivered his orders, and his subordinate had complied. He smiled, a genuine, satisfied smile that never reached his eyes. He stepped forward and patted my cheek, a gesture one gives to a well-behaved child or a favorite dog. "Good girl." He turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing on the imported marble of the hallway, leaving me alone with the silent, glittering view of the city. I sat there for a full minute, unmoving. Then, my hand reached for the navy dress. I picked it up, the silk cool and heavy in my grip. I squeezed the fabric, my knuckles turning white, the fine material wrinkling in my fist. The coldness of the silk was a stark contrast to the hot, meticulous rage burning quietly in my chest. He had told me to stay quiet. He had commanded my silence. He assumed my silence meant ignorance. He assumed that because I had stopped my career, I had stopped thinking. He was wrong. I knew Julian. I knew his tells, and I knew his partner, Marcus Thorne. I knew the late-night calls Julian thought I slept through. I knew about the encrypted files on his laptop he thought I couldn't access. I knew the smell of fear and deception. It was the same smell that clung to every white-collar criminal I had ever brought down. Julian and Marcus were hiding something big. And tonight, as they paraded me around as their pretty, silent decoration, they had forgotten one crucial thing. A forensic accountant's greatest strength isn't talking, it's listening. And in the silence they demanded of me, I would find the truth. The silence in the elevator descending to the garage was a heavy, weighted blanket. Julian stood beside me, not looking at me, but checking his reflection in the polished bronze doors, smoothing the lapels of his suit. I watched the numbers light up as we dropped. 34 floors of pressurized quiet. The navy silk of the dress felt alien against my skin. Too smooth. Too cold. In the back seat of the town car, the city blurred past. The rain had started, a fine mist that turned the streetlights into hazy supernovas. We sped along Lakeshore Drive, the water of the lake black and invisible to our right, the glittering spine of the city to our left. The car was silent, save for the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the faint, expensive scent of Julian's leather briefcase. We were heading to the Apex, a restaurant on the 95th floor of the Hancock, a place so high above the earth it was designed to make you feel untouchable. The steady, hypnotic motion of the car pulled me away from the oppressive humidity of the night, tugging me back 10 years. We met at the University of Chicago, in the business school. It feels like a different life now, like watching a movie about someone else. I wasn't Mrs. Hayes then, the woman who organized dinner parties and sat silent. I was Alara Jensen, I was the star of the forensic accounting program, the one who saw stories in spreadsheets and truth in tax law. I was the one the professors tapped for complex case studies. Julian was the other side of the coin. He was the magnetic MBA candidate, the man with the effortless charm, the booming laugh, and the ideas that seemed to stretch to the horizon. He spoke of disruption and market capture. I spoke of compliance and verifiable assets. He pursued me relentlessly. He said he was fascinated by my mind. He'd never met anyone who could see through the matrix like I could. He called me his secret weapon. I remember the night that title was truly earned, his first real startup, a small tech venture he'd poured everything into. He was 6 months in and courting his first round of seed funding, and his books were a mess. He was terrified, convinced he was going broke. He brought me to his tiny shared office at 2 a.m, the room smelling of stale coffee and desperation. "The investors want a full audit," he'd said, his hands shaking as he ran them through his hair. I think my partner is stealing from me." I sat at his desk. I worked for 48 hours straight, fueled by nothing but black coffee and the thrill of the hunt. He thought his partner was skimming. What I found was worse, but also cleaner. It wasn't theft, it was catastrophic mismanagement. A key vendor contract had been misread, and a decimal point error in an automated billing cycle meant they were hemorrhaging cash. A $300,000 discrepancy, buried in thousands of lines of code and receipts. I found it. I isolated it, documented it, and built the legal framework to claw the money back from the vendor. I didn't just find the leak. I saved the company. I saved him from legal and financial ruin. He looked at the final report I presented, his eyes wide with a kind of awe I hadn't seen before and haven't seen since. He didn't just hug me. He lifted me off the ground. "You're the brains, Alara," he whispered, his voice thick with relief. "You're the real brains of this whole goddamn operation." He adored my intelligence then. He bragged about it at parties. He'd introduce me to potential partners and say, "This is Ilara. She's my better half, smarter than all of us combined. Don't ever try to lie to her. She'll know before you do." He made me feel like my mind was the most attractive thing about me. We were married in Napa, at a small vineyard just off the Silverado Trail. It was simple, maybe 50 guests. The air smelled of eucalyptus and fermenting grapes. We wrote our own vows. His were about building an empire together, side by side. Mine were about partnership, about being his truth teller, his anchor. We were a team. That was the word, the one we built our marriage on. Team. We were equals. We respected what the other brought to the table. The crack started 3 years ago. It was almost invisible at first. The change had a name, and that name was Marcus Thorne. Julian met Marcus at a donor gala. Marcus was 10 years older, louder, with a ruddy complexion and a laugh that sounded like a breaking plate. He wore watches that were offensively large, giant gold and diamond monstrosities that he flashed like weapons. Marcus was new money, but he operated with the brutal confidence of an old-world tyrant. His philosophy was simple, and I heard him boom it across a steakhouse one night. "Rules, Julian, are just suggestions for other people." They founded Ethelred Capital together. Marcus had the connections to the darker, riskier pools of capital. Julian had the polish, the charisma, the legitimate face. And Julian, intoxicated by the altitude of this new money, began to change. My input, once his secret weapon, became an annoyance. The brains of the operation became the wet blanket. I remember looking at the prospectus for one of their first major acquisitions. "Julian," I said gently, pointing to a line in their debt structuring. "This leverage is insane. If the market dips even 0.5%, you're insolvent." The Julian I married would have sat down, analyzed the numbers with me, and debated. The new Julian, Julian Thorne's partner, just waved a dismissive hand. "Ilara, honey, that's negative thinking," he said, not even looking up from his phone. "You have to have vision. Marcus says if you aren't leveraged, you aren't trying." Negative. That became my new label. When I questioned the opaque structure of their offshore holdings, I was paranoid. When I asked why their projected returns were double the industry standard, I was lacking vision and stuck in the weeds. He stopped asking me to look at his deals. He stopped talking about work at all, except to brag about the wins. I was no longer his partner. I was just the audience. The final definitive break happened one evening. I had just come home from closing a major case at my firm, a grueling 6-month investigation into a hedge fund that had ended in a massive victory. I was exhausted but exhilarated. Julian was in his study, pouring a scotch. He didn't ask about my day. "Ilara," he said, his back to me. "We need to talk about your job." "My job," I said, loosening my scarf. "We just nailed the bastards. We're celebrating tonight." "That's the problem," he said, turning around. His face was cold, decisive. "Your job. It's becoming an embarrassment." The word hit me like a slap. "An embarrassment? I'm a senior partner. You're a bookkeeper, Ilara, a part-time number cruncher." "I am a forensic accountant," I said, my voice dropping. "It's the same thing. Listen to me. I was with Marcus today. His wife, Cecilia. She runs 3 different philanthropic boards. She just raised $2 million for the Children's Hospital. All the wives. They support their husbands. They build the brand. And my wife. My wife is clocking in and out of a cubicle. It makes me look weak. It makes me look like I can't provide for my own family. I have never, not once, cared about that," I said, my voice shaking. "We built this together. We were a team." "We are a team," he snapped, slamming his glass on the desk. "Which is why I need you to get with the program. I need a full-time wife. I need a partner who supports my career, who manages our life, who is available. Not someone who's always buried in someone else's receipts. I need you to quit." I stared at him. The man who had once praised my mind as his greatest asset was now demanding I put it in a box and store it in the attic, like some obsolete hobby. "Quit my career." "Yes, quit. It's time. You've had your fun. Now it's my turn. It's time to support me." We fought for a week. I used logic. I used emotion. I reminded him of the $300,000 mistake. He was immovable. He had been poisoned by Marcus, by the allure of a life where wives were beautiful, supportive, and silent. He wore me down with accusations of selfishness, of holding him back, of not believing in him. In the end, I broke. I gave my notice. I traded my corner office for a corner in our penthouse. I traded my identity for his ambition. The car slowed, gliding to a stop under the blindingly bright portico of the tower. The memory evaporated, leaving that familiar cold ache in my chest. I hadn't just quit my job. I had disarmed myself. I had willingly handed over my sharpest tool, the very thing he'd once admired, and allowed him to forget I ever knew how to use it. The doorman, uniformed in black, pulled my door open. "Mrs. Hayes." I slid out of the car, the humid night air instantly clinging to the navy silk. Julian's hand was immediately on the small of my back, possessive, guiding me. "Smile, Ilara," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear as he steered me toward the revolving doors. "Showtime." I felt the muscles in my face pull into the required shape. A pleasant, empty smile. He thought I was his weapon, safely locked away. He'd forgotten that the most dangerous weapon is the one your enemy no longer believes is loaded. The elevator ride to the 95th floor was oppressively silent. Julian checked his watch, a nervous twitch in his jaw. I watched the floor numbers climb, my reflection a ghostly overlay against the dark, polished wood of the cab. I smoothed the navy silk over my lap, my hands perfectly steady. My outward calm was a fortress. Inside, my mind was sifting through the past, connecting the dots, following the trail of breadcrumbs that had led us to this moment. The true architect of my silence wasn't just Julian. It was Marcus Thorne. I remembered the moment Marcus decided I was a problem. It was 2 years ago. Ethelred Capital's first Christmas party, held in a sprawling, rented-out gallery space in the West Loop. The room was overcrowded, loud with forced laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses. Julian was high on his own success, magnetic and brilliant, working the room. I was trying. I truly was. I was talking to a group of analysts, discussing a recent market fluctuation, when Marcus bore down on us. He was drunk, his face flushed. He didn't join the conversation, he bulldozed it. He clapped a heavy hand on Julian's shoulder, pulling him away from the group. They stood near a large, unsettling piece of modern art, not 10 feet from me. Marcus spoke in a stage whisper that was designed to carry. I heard my name. I went still, pretending to be fascinated by the hors d'oeuvres tray. Julian, my boy. Marcus slurred, gesturing toward me with his glass. Your wife. She's too uptight, all business. She's making your junior guys nervous. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. I waited for Julian to defend me, to say, that's Ilara, she's brilliant. To say, she's my partner. She's just smart. Marcus, Julian said, but his tone was apologetic, not proud. Smart is what we hire. Marcus scoffed. Wives are supposed to be soft, fun. You need to train her, Julian. Get her to loosen up. It's a bad look for the brand. I will never forget what happened next. Julian didn't defend me. He didn't tell Marcus to back off. He laughed. It was a short, nervous laugh, a sound of capitulation. Yeah, I know, Julian said, glancing over at me. She can be a little serious sometimes. I'll talk to her. He agreed. He agreed to train me. That was the night my husband, the man who had once called me his brains, officially became Marcus Thorne's acolyte. He had chosen his new partner over his old one. The shift after that was subtle, then total. Julian began to deploy Marcus's tactics of psychological warfare, systematically dismantling my confidence and my perception of reality. The gaslighting became a daily ritual. It started with small questions. Julian had a sudden trip planned. The Caymans, I asked, looking at the itinerary on his calendar. That's odd. I thought this deal was based in Frankfurt. The Julian I'd married would have explained the tax implications or the legal structure. The new Julian snapped, My God, Ilara, can you not be so paranoid? He said, slamming his laptop shut. It's a client meeting. Do you have to interrogate every single thing I do? I need your support, not an audit. I flinched. Paranoid. It was a new word in his arsenal. I hadn't been paranoid. I had been curious. But he said it with such conviction that I felt a seed of doubt. Was I being paranoid? Was I overstepping a few weeks later? I was sorting our joint credit card statements, a task I still handled from our team days. I saw a recurring charge, a restaurant I'd never heard of, always for two, always expensive. On days he was supposedly working late at the office. Julian, I asked, keeping my voice mild. What are these charges from Serafina? They're not on your corporate card. Are you forgetting to expense them? He snatched the bill from my hand. His face darkened. Are you checking up on me now? Is that what you do all day? Sit here and track my spending. I'm just trying to make sure our finances are organized, I said, stung. It's inconsistent. What's inconsistent is your trust in me, he shouted. You're controlling. Ilara. You're jealous of my success, so you try to pick apart every little thing. I can't believe this. I'm out here killing myself to give us this life. He gestured around the penthouse. And you're in here accusing me of... What? Having a stake. You've got to stop this. It's toxic. Controlling. Jealous. Toxic. He was so forceful, so full of righteous indignation, that I retreated. I apologized. The forensic accountant, apologized for pointing out an anomaly. He was conditioning me to believe that my greatest skill, my attention to detail, was a character flaw. He was teaching me that my questions were attacks, and my logic was emotional instability. The isolation was the next phase. It was executed with chilling precision. The invitations to Ethelred Capital events, which had once included Mr. and Mrs. Julian Hayes, slowly became Mr. Julian Hayes. At first, I asked, "Isn't the quarterly dinner tonight?" Julian. "Oh, yeah," he'd say, straightening his tie, avoiding my eyes in the mirror. "God, it's just a bunch of boring speeches. You'd hate it. Stay home. Order whatever you want. I'll be late." He framed it as a kindness, as him sparing me from boredom. The next time, it was a client reception. "Shh, Julian. I thought I was supposed to meet the new partners from London. You know, Marcus decided to make it team only at the last minute. Just the core guys. It's all numbers. Ilara, you'd be bored to tears. Trust me." Bored. You'd hate it. Trust me. He was slowly, expertly, phasing me out of his professional life, brick by brick, until I was completely walled off. He was turning me into a ghost in my own life. I became a specter, haunting the 4,500 square feet of our spectacular penthouse apartment. I would wander from room to room, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic, godlike view of Lake Michigan. The water would be blue, then gray, then black, and I would just watch it. The apartment was filled with priceless art Julian had bought at auctions, furniture chosen by a high-priced designer. Nothing in it was mine. Nothing in it felt like me. I had no purpose but to exist within these glass walls, to be the beautiful, quiet wife, the proof of his success. I was an object, a very expensive, very well-maintained possession. The elevator chimed softly, the bronze doors sliding open to the 95th floor. The sound jolted me back to the present. We were at the apex. The hostess, a woman who looked more like a model, greeted us with a deferential smile. "Mr. Hayes, your table is ready." Julian's hand was on my back again, the proprietary pressure. "Thank you. Our guests have arrived." "They have, sir. Right this way." As we followed her into the main dining room, the full realization, which had been growing in the dark recesses of my mind for months, finally crystallized. It landed with the cold, hard clarity of a diamond. Julian didn't isolate me because he was ashamed of me. He didn't silence me because I was negative or controlling. He did it because he was terrified of me. He was terrified because he and Marcus were dirty, and they knew, deep down, that I was the one person on earth who could see it. They knew that my auditor face wasn't just a quirky habit, it was a threat. My paranoia about the Caymans and my controlling nature with receipts weren't character flaws. They were the professional instincts of a hunter who had just caught a scent. He hadn't taken away my career to make me a better wife. He had disarmed me to make himself a better criminal. He wasn't just gaslighting me. He was implementing a counterintelligence program against the only person who could expose him. "Ilara," Julian whispered, his voice tight as we approached the table. "Remember. Smile." I looked up, and for the first time, my smile felt real. It was no longer the empty, placid mask of a ghost. It was the calm, patient smile of a predator. He thought he was bringing a prop to this dinner. He had no idea he had just brought the executioner. The hostess led us through the main dining room. The sound was hushed, a symphony of quiet conversations, the distant chime of silver on porcelain. The air was cool and smelled faintly of saffron and old money. My smile felt nailed in place, a rictus of pleasantry. Julian's hand was a permanent fixture on my back, a constant, low-grade pressure, but my mind was not on the table we were approaching. It was a month ago, in the sterile quiet of our own home, when the vague, creeping unease had finally coalesced into a sharp, undeniable certainty. It had a name: Project Cygnus. For the past quarter, it was the only thing Julian and Marcus spoke about. It was the flagship deal, the one that would elevate Ethelred Capital from a boutique firm to a major player. It was all Julian talked about, in vague, grandiose terms: emerging markets, proprietary tech, disruptive potential. But when with the lingering habits of a wife who was once a partner, Asked a simple question about the asset class. He had shut me down. It's complex. Ilara, way above the pay grade of your old firm. The condescension was standard, but the secrecy was new. That's when the new habits began. First, the phone calls. They started around 2 in the morning. I would wake in the king-sized bed, the space beside me empty and cool. I'd hear the floorboards creak, and then the muffled, urgent cadence of Julian's voice from his home office down the hall. The door, which had never been locked in our entire marriage, was now locked. I stood outside it one night, my bare feet cold on the marble floor. I couldn't make out the words, only the tone a low, percussive urgency, punctuated by long silences, as if he were listening to an overseas speaker. It was the sound of a man trying to hold a dozen fragile things together at once. When I confronted him about it the next morning, he'd brushed me off. It was Marcus. He'd lied, not meeting my eye. He's in a different time zone. He forgets. Marcus lived in Lincoln Park, maybe 5 miles away. Julian didn't even care enough to make the lie believable. Then came the second wall. The mail. I had always managed our personal finances, even after I quit. It was a small, pathetic remnant of my old life. But I clung to it. I balanced our accounts to the penny. I optimized our tax strategies. It was a way to keep my mind sharp. One afternoon, I went to our private mailroom to retrieve the post. There was nothing from our personal bank. No credit card statements for Julian. I checked online. The joint accounts were all there, but his personal Amex, the one he used for discretionary business expenses, had vanished from my dashboard. When I tried to access it directly, a new screen popped up. This account has been switched to paperless billing. Please enter your password. His password, the one we had shared for a decade. It didn't work. He had locked me out. The man who had once begged me to find a $300,000 error was now hiding his monthly steak dinners from me. He was sealing every crack, every potential point of entry. My paranoia, as he called it, was now just observation. The real break came on a Tuesday, exactly 1 month ago. It was raining, just like tonight. Julian was stressed, agitated about a call with Petrov that had been moved up. He was pacing the living room, snapping at me for the volume on the television being too loud. When he decided to take a shower to clear his head, he walked into the master bath, and I heard the hiss of the steam shower. I went to the study to grab a book, and I saw it. His laptop, open on the desk. The screen was dark, but it was asleep, not shut down. He hadn't locked it. In his agitation, he had forgotten. I stood frozen. I could hear the muffled sound of the water pounding against the glass in the bathroom. This was the line, the one I had, for 3 years, refused to cross. I was his wife. I was not his auditor. But he had already made his choice. He had chosen Marcus. He had chosen the locked door, the hidden statements, the lies. He had treated me like an adversary for so long. He had finally turned me into one. My professional instincts, dormant and starved, took over. It felt like breathing after being held underwater. I didn't hesitate. I sat in his chair, the leather still warm. I touched the trackpad. The screen flickered to life. His email inbox. A wall of unread messages, mostly market reports and newsletters. But his gaze, my gaze, was different. I wasn't a wife. I was an investigator. I didn't look at what was there. I looked for what was missing. I clicked on his deleted items folder. It was mostly junk, but he was arrogant. He was a bad liar, and he was a sloppy criminal. He deleted things, but he never emptied the trash. My eyes scanned the subject lines. My heart was a cold, hard knot in my chest. And then I saw it, a chain of emails, not just deleted, but partially deleted. He had tried to erase the thread, but had only managed to delete his own sent messages, leaving the replies from the other parties. The participants Julian Hayes, Marcus Thorne, and a third, unfamiliar entity, A. Geller, Delaware Trust and Holdings, a law firm in Delaware. the go-to state for anonymous shell corporations. The subject line made my blood run cold. Re-Cygnus fee structure. My fingers flew across the trackpad, my old skills returning with frightening speed. I opened the most recent reply from the lawyer. It was brief, professional, and utterly damning. Marcus, confirming receipt of the revised directive. The initial funding transfer will be structured as a consultation fee as discussed, payable to Thorn Solutions LLC upon execution of the Petrov contract. The amount of $480,000 is noted. $480,000. The number was specific, too specific. It wasn't a round $500,000. It was a calculated figure. Thorn Solutions LLC, a shell, a ghost entity created to receive a fee that was clearly being siphoned directly from the main investment from Petrov before it ever hit the Ethelred Capital Fund. This wasn't a fee. This was a skimming operation. My eyes darted to the bottom of the email. There was an attachment. My heart hammered against my ribs. Cygnus fee structure V4 taunt XLSX. An Excel spreadsheet. My native language. I clicked it. The icon bounced in the dock, the program opening. I could feel the sweat on the back of my neck. I heard the hiss of the shower stop. My stomach dropped. I tried to close the program, but it was too late. The file was opening. The bathroom door opened. I stared at the screen, the spreadsheet launching in a blaze of white light. "What are you doing?" I spun around in the chair. Julian stood in the doorway, a towel wrapped around his waist, his hair dripping onto his shoulders. His face was pale. His eyes flickered from my face to the laptop screen. I was just... I stammered, my voice betraying me. He saw the subject line. He saw the name of the law firm. He saw the Excel icon. The explosion was instantaneous. It was not the cold, gaslighting anger I was used to. This was primal. This was terror. "Get away from that!" he roared. He lunged across the room, not like a husband, but like an animal. He didn't just close the laptop. He grabbed the entire machine, ripping the power cord from the wall. He tore it from my hands, my fingers stinging from the force. He stood over me, his face a mask of crimson rage, his chest heaving. He held the laptop like a weapon. "I told you!" he screamed, his voice echoing in the silent, opulent room. "I told you never to touch my things. What did you see? What were you doing?" "Julian, Are you trying to sabotage me?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "After everything I've done, are you trying to destroy me, to destroy us?" He was trembling, his whole body shaking with a fury so profound it terrified me. I had seen him angry. I had never seen him this unhinged. I stood up slowly, my own fear evaporating, replaced by a cold, analytical calm. I had my answer. A man who was conducting legitimate business might be angry at the invasion of privacy. He might be frustrated. He would not, however, react with the blind animal panic of a man who had just been caught with his hand in the vault. His disproportionate rage was the final piece of evidence, the missing line item in the ledger. This wasn't a business deal. This wasn't a disagreement. This was a crime. "No, Julian," I said, my voice perfectly quiet, my hands steady at my sides. "I'm not trying to sabotage you." I left him shaking in the study and went to the bedroom. I had my confirmation. I knew, with the certainty of a mathematical proof, that my husband was a thief. And I knew, as I watched him from the doorway, that he was also a fool. A sloppy, terrified fool. After the explosion in the study over the laptop, a new, frigid peace settled between us. Julian was preternaturally attentive for a few days, buying me a diamond bracelet I didn't ask for. He was covering his tracks, mistaking my silence for forgiveness. He thought the incident was closed. For me, it was just the beginning. My suspicions were confirmed. My husband was a thief. But the moment my passive anger calcified into a cold, hard, actionable plan came 2 weeks later. It was 2 weeks before tonight's dinner with Petrov. The event was the annual acquisitions gala for the Art Institute. It was the glittering peak of the Chicago social calendar, a room suffocating in old money and new ambition. I was in a crimson silk gown, one Julian had picked out. I looked the part. I was playing the part. My role, as defined by Julian, was to build the brand. This meant circulating among the other wives, a flock of impeccably maintained women who wielded their husband's power like a borrowed handbag. I was in a small circle with Cecilia Thorne, Marcus's wife, and 2 other women whose names I'd already forgotten. The conversation was a predictable, vapid drone, the incompetence of summer staff in the Hamptons, the logistical nightmare of getting a child into the right preschool, the merits of a new cleanse. "It's just impossible," Cecilia was drawling, idly twisting the enormous canary diamond on her finger. "You simply cannot find good help anymore." Why, I was nodding, my smile fixed, my mind a million miles away, tracing the flow of money to a Delaware LLC. I was just about to offer a placid, agreeable murmur when the smell of whiskey and egotism announced his arrival. Marcus Thorne. He was drunker than usual, his face a high-gloss pink, his voice a full-volume assault on the room's polite hum. He wasn't walking, he was swaggering, a king in his own imaginary empire. He saw our group and made a direct line for me. He didn't greet us. He didn't excuse himself. He invaded. He strode up and, in a move of shocking, proprietary boldness, he slung a heavy, damp arm over my shoulder, pulling me against his side. I stiffened instantly. The scent of his cigar smoke clung to his jacket. The other women's conversation died in an awkward, suspended breath. "Ladies, ladies," Marcus boomed, his voice projecting to the entire vicinity. He jostled me against him. "Look who I found. It's Alara, our very own secret weapon, our great brain." He grinned, his teeth very white against his florid face. He squeezed my shoulder, his fingers digging into my collarbone. "We have to keep her locked up at home, you know." He laughed, a loud braying sound that made several people turn. "If we let her out, she might find out how much fun we're really having." A wave of hot, suffocating humiliation washed over me. The other women produced nervous, fluttering titters. Cecilia just rolled her eyes, as if this was a tired, familiar performance. I was a prop in his drunken comedy routine. My eyes darted across the room, a desperate, reflexive search for Julian, and I found him. He was standing not 20 feet away, near the towering entrance to the modern wing, deep in conversation with a bank president. He had seen it. He had heard it. His gaze met mine for one agonizing, crystal-clear second. He did not move. He did not frown. He did not look angry. He did not excuse himself from his conversation to come to my defense. He smirked. It was a small, tight, barely there pulling at the corner of his mouth. It was a smirk of shared amusement, a smirk of complicity. He watched me being publicly manhandled and humiliated by his partner, and he approved. Then, as if I were nothing, he turned back to the banker. My blood did not just run cold. It froze. The orchestra, the art, the chatter of the room, it all faded into a distant, buzzing roar. Marcus, fueled by Julian's silent endorsement, doubled down. He shook me again, as if to emphasize his point. "I am serious," he bellowed, for the benefit of anyone who might have missed his first act. "This one. Can you believe she was an accountant?" He said the word accountant like it was something he had scraped off his shoe. "A bean counter. Imagine, thank God, our boy Julian saved her from that boring-ass life. Right. Rescued her, got her out of the little cubicle and into the couture. This time, the laughter was genuine. I was the joke. The boring, serious, little accountant, a dusty relic saved from obscurity by her dynamic, powerful husband. It was the perfect story. He finally released me, giving me a hard, condescending pat on the back that nearly sent me stumbling. "You're a good sport, Alara," he slurred, and then he was gone, moving through the crowd, a vortex of noise and arrogance. I stood there, stunned, my skin crawling where he had touched me. The crimson dress felt like a brand. The other wives, in a flurry of social grace, immediately pretended it had not happened. Cecilia sighed and launched back into her story about the incompetent caterer. I was invisible again, but this time I understood. The car ride home was a study in silence. Julian was triumphant. He had secured a foursome with the bank president. He was humming, a low, tuneless sound of pure self-satisfaction. He did not mention the incident. He did not ask if I was all right. He did not apologize for his partner's behavior or for his own inaction. He acted as if nothing had happened. Back in the penthouse, the silence was absolute. Julian was asleep in minutes, the soft sound of his breathing a rhythm of obscene innocence. I went into the master bathroom and turned on the light. I looked at myself in the mirror, the crimson gown, the diamond earrings, the flushed cheeks. I looked like a woman who had been humiliated, but I did not cry. The tears simply were not there. The hot shame had burned away, leaving something else in its place, something cold and hard and perfectly clear. I stood there, in that marble mausoleum, and I finally, truly understood. Julian's smirk was not a moment of weakness or cowardice. It was a strategic confirmation. Marcus's performance was not a random, drunken outburst. It was a deliberate, public reinforcement of their narrative. She's the boring accountant. She's the serious one. She's the wet blanket. She's lucky to be here. It was an inoculation. They were actively, systematically, building a public profile for me as a harmless, slightly dim, non-entity. They were discrediting me in plain sight. If I ever found anything, if I ever went to a lawyer, or a partner, or the authorities, who would they believe Julian, the charismatic visionary, or his bitter, controlling, boring wife who was jealous of his success? They weren't just covering their tracks. They were poisoning the well. They weren't just silencing me at home. They were silencing me in the world. My public identity as a vapid trophy wife was not a byproduct of their success. It was a component of their crime. It was their insurance policy. A cold, exhilarating clarity washed over me. I finally saw the full board, and I made my decision. I would not confront him. Confrontation was his game. He would twist my words. He would deploy his arsenal of gaslighting. He would call me paranoid, sensitive, crazy. I would be on the defensive, and he would win. No, I would play my game. My game was numbers. My game was data. My game was the truth that hides in plain sight. I would be the perfect ghost. I would be the wife they had so carefully crafted. I would be silent and supportive and beautiful. I would smile. I would nod. I would organize his dinners and approve his menus. And in the silence he demanded, in the invisibility he had built for me, I would use the very boring skills they mocked. I would find everything. I would build my case, piece by piece, spreadsheet by spreadsheet. I would not act out of hot anger. I would act with cold, forensic precision. I would wait. I would wait for the moment of their greatest, most arrogant triumph, the moment when everything was on the line, the moment when they were most assured of their victory and most convinced of my irrelevance. I would wait for this dinner with Petrov. The opportunity came exactly 3 days ago, on a Saturday. Julian was in New York for a flash trip, a last-minute 24-hour sprint to finalize details with a secondary investor. I knew it was a lie. His travel bag was too light, and his agitation was too high. He was putting out a fire, or, more likely, starting a new one. The moment the front door closed, the moment I heard the deadbolt slide shut, the penthouse was mine. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was an asset. I was no longer a ghost. I was an auditor. I went straight to his study. I didn't bother with his laptop. After his explosion a month ago, I knew he'd have locked it down with security protocols he probably bought online. Amateurs always overcorrect. He was focused on digital defense. He had forgotten about the physical world. My target was the painting behind his desk. It was a massive, chaotic, abstract piece, all slashes of black and angry red. Julian called it a brilliant investment. I called it a visual representation of his anxiety. It was also, as I had discovered one afternoon while supervising the cleaning crew, hilariously, predictably, hinged. I lifted the heavy canvas off its magnetic latch. Behind it, set flush into the wall, was a dark gray, digital safe, the kind hotels use, simple, but effective against a casual intruder. But I was not a casual intruder. I placed my fingers on the keypad. I knew Julian. I knew the man he was, and I knew the man he pretended to be. He built his identity around Marcus Thorne, around strength, around ruthless capitalism. But deep down, he was still the sentimental, slightly insecure boy from business school. He would never use a password related to his new life. His password would be a relic of his old one, a time before Marcus, a time when he was, in his own mind, pure. I entered the 6 digits, the birthday of his first dog, a golden retriever named Buster that had died when he was 19. A detail he'd told me in our first week of dating, a detail he thought proved his soft side, a detail he was now so arrogant he assumed I had long since forgotten. The safe clicked open with a soft, electronic whir. My heart was not pounding. My hands were not shaking. I felt a cold, calm, methodical focus, the kind I used to feel just before I found the critical error in a billion-dollar ledger. I pulled the door open. Inside, there was no cash. There were no bearer bonds. There were no incriminating paper documents. Julian was too modern for that, too paranoid. There was only one thing, a black, brushed metal solid-state drive, no bigger than a credit card. It was sitting in a velvet-lined indentation, as if it were a piece of jewelry. Affixed to the top was a small, white label, printed from his label maker. It said, "Insurance." I took it. I didn't close the safe. I didn't replace the painting. I walked, not ran, to my own home office, a small room Julian had allowed me to keep, the one he never entered, filled with my boring books on tax law and my old, personal laptop, a machine he did not know I had kept triple encrypted and air-gapped from our home network, a machine that still had an active paid-in-full license for the most advanced forensic accounting software on the market. I plugged the SSD into a USB port. My machine recognized it, but the drive was locked. As I expected, a high-level AES 256 encryption, standard. A password prompt appeared. This, I knew, would be his second mistake. Criminals, especially white-collar ones, are creatures of profound arrogance and profound laziness. They believe their systems are infallible. They build a fortress, but they use the same key for every single door. I typed in the same 6 digits. The birthday of the dead dog. I pressed enter. The prompt vanished. The drive icon appeared on my desktop. Access granted. My God, he was a fool. I opened the drive. The file structure that appeared was not the messy dumping ground of a frightened amateur. It was meticulous. It was organized. It was, I realized with a dawning chill, the work of an accountant. My work. He had learned from me. After all, the folders were labeled by date, by project, by entity. Ethelred, Cygnus, Marcus, personal. It wasn't insurance. It was a parallel set of books. I clicked open the Cygnus folder. It was all there. Hundreds of files, scanned contracts, identical to the ones on his laptop. But with one critical difference, some had different signature pages, showing different wire instructions, scanned bank records from offshore accounts, memos. And then I saw it, a folder labeled audio. My hand hovered over the trackpad. This was it. This was the core. I clicked. The folder contained dozens of M4A files. The file names were just dates and times. Oct 14 2 a.m. Nov 03 10 p.m. Marcus call. Nov 12 office Marcus Julian. He hadn't just been taking notes. He had been recording everything. I double-clicked the file named Nov 12 office Marcus Julian. My speakers hissed to life. It was a high-quality recording. The sound was clear. I heard the clinking of a glass. Then Marcus's voice, loud and booming, as if he were pacing. And the beauty is, Petrov's money doesn't even touch the main fund for 72 hours. It sits in the Delaware holding account, Marcus was saying, which is just long enough for our friends at Thorn Solutions to bill their $480K consultation fee, clean as a whistle. By the time Petrov's accountants even get the statement, the money is gone, and the fee is just part of the cost of acquisition. Then, I heard Julian's voice, but it was not the confident, booming voice of my husband, the partner at Ethelred Capital. It was a thin, nervous, reedy sound I hadn't heard in a decade. Marcus, it's a lot, Julian whispered. 480,000. That's not a fee. That's grand larceny. What if they audit the holding account? Audit. Marcus laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Who's going to audit it? Us. Don't be a coward, Julian. This is how the game is played. You get your cut, I get mine, and my wife gets her little nest egg. Everybody wins. But Marcus? But nothing are you in, or are you out? Because if you're out, Julian, you're out, and you know too much. The silence on the recording was heavy. I could picture Julian in that room, trapped, sweating, the smell of his fear palpable even through the speakers. I'm in, Julian finally said, his voice barely a whisper. I'm in. The recording clicked off. I sat back, my mind racing, the pieces snapping into place with a violent, sickening precision. I had been wrong. I had assumed Julian was the mastermind, or at least an equal partner. I had assumed he was the one getting rich, the one pulling the strings alongside Marcus. But this was not the work of a partner. This insurance drive was not a mutually assured destruction policy with Marcus. It was an insurance policy against him. Julian was not the shark. He was the terrified, cowardly, weak-willed accomplice who had gotten in too deep and was now drowning. He was being strong-armed by a man he feared, and he was committing the crime, but he was simultaneously, meticulously, building a legal case against his own co-conspirator. This drive was his exit strategy. It was his leverage. It was his get-out-of-jail-free card. This was his proof, if the whole thing blew up, that he was the victim, that Marcus Thorne was the monster, and he, Julian Hayes, was just a scared, coerced family man who had been forced into it. He wasn't just helping Marcus, he was documenting every single felony Marcus committed, creating a perfect fireproof case for the FBI. My humiliation at the art gala flashed back to me. Julian's smirk. It hadn't been approval. It had been relief. He was happy to let Marcus paint me as a fool, because a foolish wife would never be a threat. He was happy to let Marcus humiliate me, because it kept Marcus placated. He wasn't just a thief. He was a coward, using my public humiliation as a shield and my silence as a cover, all while building a case to save his own skin. A new kind of anger, purer and colder than any I had felt before, settled over me. It was not the hot anger of a betrayed wife. It was the cold disgust of a professional for a sloppy, pathetic, spineless amateur. I looked at the drive. He had built the case, but I would be the one to decide how and when it was presented. I inserted a fresh, encrypted USB drive of my own. I began the file transfer. I would copy everything. I would have his insurance. And then I put the SSD back in the velvet box, returned it to the safe, and swung the heavy red and black painting back into place. It clicked, and the wall was, once again, seamless. He had no idea his entire case was now in my hands. Julian was scheduled to return from New York the following afternoon. That gave me less than 24 hours. I did not sleep. I did not move from my chair for 7 consecutive hours. The cold, methodical rage I felt was a powerful stimulant, a razor-sharp focus that was more potent than any caffeine. The sun set over the lake, and the city lights ignited, but I did not notice. I was locked in my office, the door bolted, and I was finally, after 3 years of suffocating silence, back at work. I had Julian's entire insurance case copied onto my own drive. Now, it was time for my analysis. I was not a betrayed wife. I was a forensic accountant with a target. I didn't just review the files. I cross-referenced them. I built a timeline. I synced the audio recordings with the metadata on the scanned contracts. I matched the dates of Julian's business trips to the Caymans with the wire transfer initiation dates from the parallel ledgers. The picture that emerged was not just damning, it was complete, and it was grotesque. First, I examined the victim, Mr. Petrov. Julian's fear of this man was justified. The dossier Julian had compiled was thorough, filled with translations of German and Russian news articles and reports from private intelligence firms. Petrov was not just a new investor. He was an Eastern European oligarch, a man who had built a global logistics empire from the ashes of the Soviet Union. He was rumored to be utterly ruthless with his enemies. But his one defining, almost pathological trait was an obsession with loyalty and honesty. He demanded absolute fealty. One memo detailed an incident where he had personally, systematically, and legally annihilated a former partner in Zurich for skimming what was described as a mere $50,000. He did not just sue, he bankrupted the man, his family, and his reputation. He detested being lied to more than he disliked losing money. And Julian and Marcus were preparing to look him in the eye at a 95th floor restaurant and steal from him. Next, the mechanism. I opened the spreadsheet I had barely glimpsed a month ago. Cygnus Fee Structure V4.XLSX. It was all there. Project Cygnus was a $50 million acquisition of several data centers, funded entirely by Petrov. But the money wasn't flowing directly to Ethelred Capital. It was designed in steps. Step 1. Petrov's $50 million would be wired into a temporary holding account at a specific bank in Delaware. The account was named Ethelred Cygnus Holding. Step 2. Before that capital was moved into the main Ethelred Fund to execute the acquisition, a single consulting fee was to be paid out. The line item was clear. Recipient Thorn Solutions LLC. Amount $480,000. My fingers flew across my keyboard. I used my own private, untraceable search tools, Delaware Division of Corporations. Thorn Solutions LLC. It existed. It was filed exactly 6 months ago. It had no public-facing website, no listed employees, no operational history. Its only address was that of a registered agent in Wilmington, a notorious hub for anonymous shell corporations. It was a ghost. But this is where the real truth lay. This was the true twist, the one that made my blood freeze. I went back to Julian's meticulous insurance files. In his paranoia, he hadn't just saved the audio, he had saved everything. In a subfolder labeled Marcus Personal, I found the LLC formation documents. I opened the scanned PDF. I expected to see Marcus Thorn listed as the sole proprietor. He was not. My breath caught in my chest. The sole beneficiary, the managing member, of Thorn Solutions LLC was Cecilia Thorn, his wife. The woman who complained about the incompetence of her caterers. The woman who wore the garish canary diamond. This was not a simple skim. This was not Marcus paying himself. This was something far more complex and desperate. Why would he steal $500,000 just to give it to his wife? The audio files gave me the answer. I found a recording of a call, dated just 2 weeks ago. It was Julian and Marcus was drunk, his voice thick with scotch and a desperate, whining self-pity. "She's trying to freeze everything, Julian." Marcus was slurring. The bitch. Her lawyers are trying to put a lien on my Ethelred shares. She wants half of my company. So just delay the divorce. Marcus. Julian's voice, thin and placating. I can't, Marcus roared. She filed this Cygnus deal. This fee. It's the only way I can get cash out before the discovery phase. It's the only asset her lawyers can't find. It goes to her shell company. See, she holds it, clean and quiet. And then, after the dust settles, after the judgment, she gives me my half back. It's our private settlement, funded by our favorite Russian. It's perfect. I had to put my head in my hands. It was stunning. He was committing wire fraud. He was defrauding Petrov. He was defrauding the other Ethelred shareholders. And he was doing it all in conspiracy with his wife, Cecilia, to hide assets from the Illinois divorce court. They were playing a game together, against the court, and using Petrov's money as the stakes. And Julian, my husband, he was the architect of the transfer. He was the one managing the wire instructions. He was the one who had set up the holding account. He was actively, knowingly, helping them commit a federal crime. Why I found that, too. In the recording from November 12th, Marcus had promised him a cut. You get your cut. I dug into the projections for Phase 2 of the Cygnus deal. And there it was, a line item, buried in a complex real estate acquisition plan, a project management bonus payable to J. Hayes. The amount $100,000. They were stealing $480,000 from Petrov. Marcus and Cecilia would use it to commit perjury in their divorce. And Julian, my husband, would get a $100,000 kickback laundered through a future real estate deal for his silence and his help. The entire thing was a sewer, but one thing still bothered me. The number, $480,000. It was so specific. It wasn't around $500,000. It wasn't a clean percentage of the $50 million deal. Why that amount? My mind, my old, beautiful, analytical mind, finally had a problem it could solve. I wasn't a wife. I was Alara Jensen, and this was a case. I ran a search on United States tax code, specifically the Bank Secrecy Act and IRS reporting requirements for corporate wire transfers, and there it was. While any transfer over $10,000 is technically reported, the real triggers, the ones that get a transfer flagged for immediate human review by a FinCEN analyst, are different. They were structuring this as a consulting fee. In the world of high finance, six-figure fees are normal, but they had clearly done their research. The amount, $480,000, was just large enough to be meaningful for their divorce scam, but just small enough to slide under the specific automated red flags at the intermediary bank. It was designed to look like a standard, albeit high, cost of business, not a cash withdrawal. It was a figure carefully calculated to avoid triggering an immediate suspicious activity report. It was arrogant, it was sloppy, and it was all the proof I needed. I spent the last hour of the night building my own case. I didn't need the hundreds of files Julian had saved. I didn't need his web of cowardly justifications. I needed the kill shots. I isolated 4 files. 1. The audio recording of Marcus and Julian, where Marcus detailed the plan to hide the money from the divorce court. 2. The scanned LLC formation document for Thorne Solutions LLC, clearly listing Cecilia Thorne as the sole beneficiary. 3. The final wire transfer instructions, authored by Julian, directing the $480,000 to that LLC. 4. The intelligence memo on Petrov, the one detailing his pathological obsession with loyalty and his annihilation of the partner who stole $50,000. This was my weapon. As the first gray pre-dawn light began to seep into the penthouse, I transferred the 4 files onto a single, encrypted micro USB drive. It was tiny, no larger than my thumbnail. I slipped it into the small coin pocket of my jeans. Then, I began to scrub. I ran a military-grade wipe on my laptop's cache and temporary files. I deleted my search history. I logged off. I walked back into Julian's study. The sun was just beginning to touch the skyline, painting the clouds in shades of crimson and red. I placed the black SSD, his insurance, back into its velvet slot. I closed the heavy steel door of the safe. I entered the Codebuster's birthday and heard the bolts slide home. I picked up the massive, ugly abstract painting and settled it back onto its magnetic latch. It was perfectly aligned, seamless. He had built a case to save himself from Marcus. He had no idea I had just taken it, and I was going to use it to destroy them all. He came home the night before the dinner, just before 10 o'clock. I heard the electronic slide of the deadbolt, a sound that always set my teeth on edge, followed by the heavy, solid thud of the penthouse door closing. He let out a long, weary sigh, a sound of almost victory, of an exhaustion so deep it was cellular. I heard the sharp clack of his keys on the marble console in the foyer, tossed with more force than necessary. I didn't move. I was curled on the long, cream-colored sofa in the living room, my legs tucked under me, enveloped in a gray cashmere lounge set. I was the very picture of domestic tranquility, of a life untouched by the grime of the world he was trafficking in. A half-empty glass of water sat on the coaster beside me. In my lap was a thick, generic thriller, the kind of book that sells by the millions in airports. My performance of the harmless, bored wife was now a second skin. He walked into the room, pulling at the knot of his tie. He looked terrible. His eyes were red-rimmed, his suit rumpled from the flight, and a dark stubble shadowed his jaw, but underneath the exhaustion, he was practically vibrating. He was high, alight with a manic, triumphant energy. His flash trip to New York had, apparently, been a resounding success. The final pieces were locked in place. He looked at me, and I could see a flicker of surprise in his eyes, as if he was almost shocked to find me here, exactly as he had left me, docile and untroubled. "Hey," he said, his voice a rough gravel. I let a few seconds pass, as if he had pulled me from a particularly gripping chapter. I looked up, slowly, and gave him a mild, tired smile. "Hey, rough trip." "The roughest," he said, scrubbing a hand over his face. He walked past me to the wet bar, his movements jerky and energized. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, pulling it off and throwing it over the back of a chair. He poured a heavy measure of scotch, no ice. He downed half of it in one swallow, closing his eyes as it hit him. God, I am so ready for tomorrow to be over. He turned, leaning back against the bar, the glass in his hand. His gaze on me sharpened. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by the focused, assessing look of the handler. This was the final check-in, the dress rehearsal. "You're ready for tomorrow?" he asked. His tone was light, but the question was not. I dutifully, carefully, folded the corner of the page to mark my spot. I placed the book on the cushion beside me. I turned my body to face him, giving him my full, undivided, placid attention. The perfect student. "Of course," I said, my voice soft and even. "The navy dress, muted jewelry, smile, and stay quiet." I remember the instructions. I watched the tension physically drain from his shoulders. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since he left for New York. He smiled. It was a real smile, one of pure, unadulterated relief. My compliance was the final soothing balm on his frayed nerves. "Good," he said, nodding. "That's good." He took a more measured sip of his scotch. "I'm sorry I've been on edge. This week has been a nightmare, this Petrov. He's not like our other investors. He's a lot." He pushed himself off the bar and came closer, sitting on the edge of the leather ottoman opposite me. He leaned in, a pantomime of intimacy, of bringing me into the circle of trust. It was a grotesque, sentimental gesture that made my skin crawl. "He's old school, Alara," he whispered, as if the walls were listening. "Seriously, old world. He likes tradition. He likes things done a certain way. He likes wives to be, well, traditional. supportive, quiet. He told Marcus that a man's wife is a reflection of his own discipline. It's insane, but that's who he is. That's why tomorrow is so critical. I held his gaze, my own expression a carefully crafted mask of wifely concern. I let a small, thoughtful frown touch my lips, as if I were processing the gravity of his words. "He sounds intense," I said, my voice just a breath. I was feeding him a line, one I had pulled directly from his own insurance file. "From what little you've said, he seems like the kind of man who pays very, very close attention to detail." The bait was in the water. It was a simple, innocuous observation. But to Julian, it was proof that I was on his side, that I was listening. He didn't just take it, he lunged. His eyes widened, a flicker of genuine excitement. He was proud of the monster he was about to con. "Intense doesn't even begin to cover it," he said, letting out a short, nervous laugh. He leaned in even closer. "You have no idea. The man is a machine, a goddamn surgeon. He doesn't miss a thing." He was bragging now, bragging about the dragon he was about to slay. His arrogance was intoxicating him. "I'm serious. Alara, he will spot a lie from a mile away. He reads every single line of every single contract himself. He notices if the wine is a degree too warm. He's the most meticulous, terrifying bastard I have ever had the displeasure of meeting. He's borderline paranoid." He took a quick, sharp breath, his eyes glittering with the thrill of the con. "That is why everything tomorrow has to be perfect. The restaurant, the wine pairings, the numbers, us. There can be no mistakes, not one single thread out of place. He looks for flaws. He hunts for them. It's his specialty." He had done it. He had, in his own fit of arrogant pride, just confirmed the central critical piece of my entire case. Petrov was not just a man who hated being lied to. He was a man who actively hunted for deception. He was a precision instrument, built to detect the very thing Julian and Marcus were about to serve him. They were not just bringing a lie to dinner. They were bringing a lie to a lie detector. I held his gaze for a long moment. I let my practiced, empty smile, the one he had demanded, the one Marcus had mocked, spread slowly across my face. It was a mask of pure, supportive, wifely agreement. "Then we'll make sure it is perfect," I said, my voice a soft, reassuring promise. "We will make sure he sees exactly what he needs to see." He beamed. The performance was flawless. He had his perfect, compliant, idiotic wife. He was safe. He reached out and patted my knee, a gesture of ownership, of finality. "That's my girl. That's exactly what I needed to hear." He finished his scotch in one gulp and stood up, his energy renewed. His exhaustion had vanished, replaced by the giddy anticipation of the final act. "I'm going to go take a long, hot shower. Tomorrow, Alara. Tomorrow. We close the deal. We change our lives." He turned and walked out of the living room, heading for the master suite. I listened to his footsteps fade, followed by the distant, solid click of the bedroom door closing. I remained on the sofa, unmoving. I picked up the thriller, but I didn't open it. I stared at the meaningless, embossed title. "We will make sure he sees exactly what he needs to see." He thought I was promising him a seamless deception. He had no idea I was promising him a brutal, meticulous truth. I did not sleep that night. I sat on that sofa as the hours ticked by, as the glittering, indifferent lights of the Chicago skyline blurred into a cold, digital tapestry. I was not nervous. I was not afraid. I was not even angry anymore. I was not preparing for a confrontation. I was not planning an argument. I was not bracing for a messy, emotional fight. I was a forensic accountant. I was reviewing my case file one last time. I was arranging the data points, ensuring the evidence was irrefutable, checking the math on a $480,000 theft. I was preparing for an execution. And the beauty of it was, I would be the only person at the table who knew the verdict had already been decided. The apex. The name itself was an act of arrogance. We were on the 95th floor, in a private room named the Citadel. The curved, floor-to-ceiling windows presented the entire Chicago skyline as a personal possession. A glittering carpet of diamonds laid at our feet. The city lights were so bright, so close, they seemed to be inside the room with us, outshining the dim, artful spotlights on the table. The room was silent, save for the hushed footsteps of the staff. The air was heavy, pressurized, and thick with the smell of wealth, a combination of aged leather, hothouse flowers, and the faint, rich aroma of truffle oil. They were already there. Marcus Thorne was in the center of the room, not sitting, but pacing, a glass of dark liquor in his hand, already in the middle of a loud, boistergonerous story. He was a man who took up all the oxygen. Beside him, seated at the table like a queen holding court, was his wife, Cecilia. Cecilia Thorne was a masterpiece of expensive, bad taste. She was draped in a gold lame dress that was too tight, and around her neck was a truly monstrous diamond necklace, a vulgar constellation of stones that glittered violently every time she moved. She saw us, and her painted-on smile widened, her eyes remaining perfectly, reptilianly still. She, the woman who was the sole beneficiary of a fraudulent $500,000 LLC, looked every bit the part of the grasping, complicit partner. And then there was Mr. Petrov. I had imagined a brute, a thick-necked, gold-chained caricature, someone loud and menacing like Marcus. The man who stood quietly as we entered was the opposite, and 1,000 times more terrifying. He was in his late 50s, slender, with a head of close-cropped silver hair. He was dressed in a simple, exquisitely tailored dark blue suit that probably cost more than Julian's entire collection. He wore no jewelry, not even a watch. His stillness was absolute. He stood near the window, his hands clasped behind his back, observing the city. When he turned, his face was placid, almost forgettable, except for his eyes. They were a pale, flat gray, as cold and depthless as the lake in winter. They were the eyes of a man who had seen everything and was impressed by nothing. He was not a shark. He was an auditor. Julian's assessment, I realized, was correct. This man hunted for flaws. Mr. Petrov. Julian surged forward, his hand outstretched, his voice a perfect, warm baritone. He was radiating charm. A pleasure to finally host you in our city. Petrov took his hand. The handshake was brief, dry, and firm. Mr. Hayes, thank you for the invitation. His English was perfect, with only the faintest trace of an Eastern European accent. His voice was quiet, forcing everyone else in the room to lean in. And this is my wife, Ilara, Julian said, his hand immediately on my back, propelling me forward. I stepped into the light. I gave Petrov the smile, the one I had practiced, calm, pleasant, and utterly vacant. Mr. Petrov, a pleasure to meet you. His cold, gray eyes met mine. He did not smile. He simply nodded, a short, assessing tilt of his head. He looked at me, truly looked at me, for a solid 3 seconds. It felt like an eternity. It was not a social glance. It was an inventory. He was cataloging me, just as he had cataloged the view and the gaudy diamonds on Cecilia. Then he dismissed me, turning back to Julian. We all took our seats. The choreography began. Julian was the perfect host, solicitous and charismatic, discussing the wine list with the sommelier, telling a light, self-deprecating anecdote about the Chicago weather. Ilara Hayes, the perfect wife, sat in her navy silk dress. I unfolded my napkin. I smiled at Marcus's opening joke, a terrible pun about finance. I inclined my head, feigning interest, as Cecilia began to describe, in mind-numbing detail, the utter incompetence of the architect she had hired to design their new pool house in Lake Forest. I mean, Honestly, she said, tapping a long, blood-red fingernail against her champagne flute. I ask for Italian marble, and he shows me something from Turkey. Can you imagine it's just impossible to find people who listen to a simple instruction? I nodded, my face a mask of sympathy. My mind was on the LLC formation documents, on her name, listed as the sole beneficiary. She was playing her role just as I was playing mine. The bored, wealthy fool. Marcus, meanwhile, dominated. He was selling. He was a tidal wave of buzzwords. Project Cygnus, he boomed, is not just an acquisition. Petrov. It is a paradigm shift. It is the future of data security. The returns are not just solid, they are explosive. We are looking at a 30% growth, year over year, guaranteed. He was lying, and he was a bad liar. The numbers were inflated, the projections pure fantasy. I, the boring accountant, could have dismantled his entire premise in under 30 seconds. Julian, who knew the real, more modest numbers, just nodded in agreement, his face a picture of earnest belief. Through it all, Petrov was silent. He was the quiet center of the storm. He ate his appetizer, a complex arrangement of scallops and foam, with a precise, economical grace. He did not interrupt. He did not ask questions. He just listened, his expression neutral. He let Marcus's waves of hype crash against him, completely unmoved. His gaze would occasionally drift. He would look at Julian, then at Marcus, then at Cecilia, and then, most often, he would look at me. His stare was unnerving. He was not, as Julian had implied, an old-world traditionalist who was pleased by a silent, pretty wife. He was an analyst. He was observing an anomaly. In a room full of noise, I was the only silent variable. He was watching me watch the others. He saw me listen. He saw my quiet, unwavering smile, and I could tell that, unlike Julian, he was not mistaking it for stupidity. He was trying to solve it. He was trying to figure out my function. The appetizer plates were cleared. The main courses were imminent. The deal was unspoken, but it was closing. Julian could feel it. His nervous energy had dissolved into a smug, confident glow. He looked at me, sitting there in my perfect, silent compliance. I was his best-behaved prop. I saw his shoulders relax. I saw the triumphant satisfaction in his eyes. He had done it. Every piece was in place. He reached over, under the table, and placed his hand on my back. He rubbed it, a slow, condescending circle. It was a gesture of ownership, a reward for the good girl. My skin turned to ice under his touch. My smile did not flicker. Marcus, sensing the moment, lifted his refilled champagne flute. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "A toast," he announced, his voice filling the room. "To the future, to Project Cygnus." He raised his glass to Petrov, who lifted his own, his expression unreadable. "And," Marcus continued, turning his grin on me and Cecilia, "to our beautiful wives, the ones who tolerate us, who support us, and who stay beautiful while we do all the hard work." Julian laughed, a loud, hearty, false sound. The others laughed. I laughed, a soft, breathy sound that was perfectly in character. We all drank. As he set his glass down, Julian leaned in close to me. His face was flushed with wine and victory. His voice was a low, triumphant whisper, meant only for my ear. "You're doing great, Alara," he breathed. "Perfect. Just perfect." I turned to him. I let my empty, adoring, wifely gaze meet his. I gave him the smallest, most deferential nod. The lie was complete. The storm was no longer gathering. It was here. It was balanced on the head of a pin, and all it needed was one single word to break. The main courses arrived with a silent, synchronized precision that was almost military. Waiters, moving as one, set down immaculate plates of seared duck breast, black cod, and roasted lamb. The aroma of a rich port wine reduction and fennel pollen filled the private room, a final decadent layer on the evening's performance. The deal was done. The food was a formality. Julian was visibly glowing, his face flushed with wine and triumph. He had successfully navigated the most dangerous investor of his career. Marcus, sitting back, let out a satisfied groan as he looked at his plate. "Now this," Marcus boomed, "is a celebration." He leaned forward, reaching for a heavy, gleaming black briefcase at his feet. He placed it on his lap, clicked the latches, and pulled out a rich, leather-bound folio. "Well, Petrov, we've talked enough. We believe in action." He opened the folio to a page already marked with a small sticky tab, the memorandum of intent, the precursor to the $50 million wire transfer. He then produced a single, comically large, gleaming black pen, a Mont Blanc. "If you'll do the honors," Marcus said, his voice slick with false ceremony, "we can begin changing the world tomorrow morning." He slid the folio and the pen across the polished dark wood table. Everything stopped. Julian held his breath, his smile frozen in place. Marcus leaned forward, a hungry, predatory grin fixed on his face. Cecilia watched the pen as if it were a diamond. Petrov reached out. His slender, steady hand closed over the pen. He did not lift it. He did not uncap it. He simply held it, balancing it between his thumb and forefinger, his gaze fixed on the nib as if it were a fascinating, complex piece of machinery. The silence in the room stretched, becoming thin, sharp, and unbearable. Julian's smile began to look strained. Marcus's grin twitched. Then, slowly, Petrov raised his head. He did not look at Marcus. He did not look at Julian. His cold, gray, analytical eyes moved past them, past the glittering diamonds on Cecilia's neck, and settled, with an unnerving, absolute focus, on me. "Mrs. Hayes," he said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the pressurized atmosphere like a scalpel. I met his gaze. My heart was a cold, steady drum. "You have been exceptionally quiet this entire evening," he continued, his tone purely conversational. "You observe, you listen, as in outsider, to this discussion. I am curious. What do you think of all this?" The air was sucked from the room. I saw Julian freeze. A rictus of pure, unadulterated panic flashed across his face. He recovered instantly, forcing a loud, hearty, dismissive laugh. "Oh, Petrov," Julian said, waving a hand as if swatting away a ridiculous question. "Alara doesn't—" "She's not involved in the details. As I told you, she doesn't—" "I was asking her," Petrov said. He did not raise his voice. He did not look away from me. He simply interrupted, his quiet words an iron wall. Julian's sentence died in his throat, his mouth hanging open slightly. The color drained from his face, leaving a sickly, pale sheen. Marcus's smile had vanished, replaced by a confused, angry scowl. It was here. The moment. The perfect, crystalline moment they had built for me. I slowly, deliberately, placed my silver fork and knife down on the edge of my plate. They made a soft, sharp clink on the fine porcelain. It was the only sound in the room. The silence was now absolute. Even the distant, glittering hum of the city 95 floors below seemed to have faded. I lifted my gaze from my plate and looked directly into Petrov's cold, gray eyes. I could feel Julian's stare burning into the side of my head, a desperate, silent, terrified plea. "Smile. Stay quiet. Good girl. Alara, please." I did not smile. I spoke. My voice was clear, steady, and perfectly calm. It was the voice I had been trained to use, the voice that presented evidence, the voice that did not waver. "I think," I said, "as a forensic accountant. I am just a little confused. I let that hang in the air for a single perfect beat. Julian looked as though he might faint. I continued, my tone one of polite, professional curiosity. I'm confused about the consulting fee, the one for $480,000, the one being paid to Thorn Solutions LLC in Delaware. I'm just wondering, from a compliance standpoint, why that fee is being paid out of the holding account before your capital accesses the main Ethelred fund. The chain reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic. To my left, Cecilia Thorne let out a choked, strangled gasp, a sound like a dying bird. The champagne flute she was holding slipped from her manicured fingers, shattering on the floor, the sound like a gunshot in the silent room. Champagne and glass sprayed across the expensive rug. Marcus Thorne went rigid, the ruddy, drunken flush drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, gray-white pallor. He looked like a man who had just been shot. Julian exploded. He shot up from his chair, his entire body lurching, his own wine glass toppled over, red wine bleeding across the white linen tablecloth like a mortal wound. His chair scretched backward, nearly falling. "Ilara!" he screamed, his voice cracking, a sound of pure, primal terror. "Shut up! I told you to shut up!" I did not flinch. I did not look at Julian. I did not look at Marcus or Cecilia. I kept my eyes locked on Petrov. He had not moved. He showed no surprise, no anger. He merely observed the chaos I had unleashed. He watched Julian's hysterical outburst. He noted Cecilia's trembling hands as she tried to dab at her gold dress. And he saw Marcus's face collapse into a mask of pure ruin. Then, with a terrifyingly slow and deliberate motion, Petrov placed the Mont Blanc pen down on the table, parallel to the unsigned folio. He looked at Marcus. His voice was no longer quiet. It was flat, cold, and final. "Thorn Solutions, LLC," he said. It was not a question. "That is the shell corporation registered in your wife's name, is it not?" Marcus. That was the final twist, the one I hadn't seen. He hadn't been testing me. He had been testing them. He already knew. He was giving them the rope, and I had simply handed it to them. Marcus's collapse was total. He sank back into his chair, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound coming out. He was a fish, pulled from the water, suffocating on the air of his own lies. Petrov stood up. He did not shout. He did not slam his fist. He calmly, precisely, picked up his heavy linen napkin and threw it onto his unfinished plate of duck. "The deal is canceled," he stated. "My lawyers will be in contact with yours, and with the U.S. Attorney's Office, regarding wire fraud." He turned his flat, gray gaze to Julian, who was still standing, frozen, trembling, his face a mask of complete and total ruin. Petrov looked at him with a disgust so profound it was almost pity. "And you, Julian," he said, "you married the only brains in your entire firm, and you told her to be quiet." He gave me one last, brief nod. It was not a nod of thanks. It was a nod of respect, an acknowledgement from one professional to another. And then, he simply turned and walked out of the room. The moment the door closed behind him, the spell was broken. "You!" Marcus screamed, finding his voice. He wasn't yelling at me. He was pointing a shaking purple finger at Julian. "You. This is your fault, your stupid wife. You said she was under control. You said she was an idiot." I don't know," Julian stammered, his eyes wide and vacant, staring at the empty doorway. She... He turned to me. His rage and his fear had coalesced into a single, trembling, pathetic mass. He looked at me as if he had never seen me before, as if I were a stranger who had just wandered in off the street. "You," he whispered, his voice shaking with a fury born of total terror. You did this. You ruined me. You ruined everything. I stood up. My movements were slow, unhurried. I picked up my own linen napkin and placed it on the table. I looked at the man I had once loved, the man who had called me his brains, the man who had demanded I become a ghost. He was hollowed out, a terrified child in an expensive suit, standing in a puddle of spilled wine. I smoothed the front of my navy silk dress. "No, Julian," I said. My voice was calm. My heart was steady. "You told me to be quiet, and I was." I met his terrified, uncomprehending stare. "But you didn't tell me to stop thinking." I looked down at my left hand. I twisted the heavy 5-carat diamond wedding ring, the symbol of our team, off my finger. I placed it on the table, right next to the spreading stain of red wine and the unsigned contract. Then, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving him alone in the wreckage. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from, so please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. Make sure you subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories and like this video. And if you really loved it, please support us by hitting that hype button to help this story be heard by so many more.